Hi, I'm Marianne Powell. I'm a researcher. Most of the research I've been involved with has been with children and young people, and theoretically grounded in childhood studies. I have a particular interest in ethics in research with children. In their chapter, Childhood Studies Meets Other Disciplines, Marliese and Debbie discuss ethics in research with children. They point to the origins of this in medical research ethics, which were developed in response to some appallingly unethical experimental studies in which participants were seriously harmed. And as a consequence, ethical guidelines were developed with the intent of protecting research participants. And these were very much the foundation for ethics in childhood research also, that children would be protected from harm if they were involved in research studies. Now, over recent years, as Marliese and Debbie point out, there's been a real development in the ways in which we see and understand children in childhood. And alongside that, developing methodologies which really support children's participation in research. So there's been this increased emphasis on participation in research, at the same time as there is this very fundamental ethical grounding in protection of people who are involved in research. And what Marliese and Debbie point to is the tension that sometimes happens between protection and participation. I was involved in a project called ERIC, an acronym for Ethical Research Involving Children. And this project set out to explore ethical considerations and challenges and dilemmas, which, as we know, can crop up at any stage of the research process. And it really is kind of impossible to set up research. We can do our best, but these challenges continue to arise. So ERIC, the project, involved engagement, consultation, discussion, conversation with over 400 researchers from all around the world. And it led to the development of a suite of resources to support researchers. These are available online, freely available at childethics.com. There's an ongoing collaboration between Southern Cross University in Australia, who led the ERIC project, and UNICEF International to support these resources and to continue developing them at childethics.com. I'm not going to talk about those resources, but what I want to touch on just briefly is that what emerged from these conversations are three kind of pillars that interact, overlap, that support an ethical approach to research. There's three things that emerged: rights, relationships, reflexivity. So taking them each in turn, in terms of rights, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child does not specifically address children's rights in research, but as Inu and Plateau in 2005 point out, there are rights that are contained within the convention which support children's rights to be properly researched. So they drew on four rights, those being children's right to freedom of expression and matters that affect them, Article 12.1, children's right to use a medium that allows them to express those opinions, Article 13.1, which really kind of aligns with methods and research, children's right to be free from exploitation as well as other harms, Article 36, and children's right to the highest possible standard of care from individuals and institutions that work with them or that engage with them. And what Inu and Plateau argue is that these four rights provide a framework for children's rights to be properly researched. And as with the convention as a whole, this points to the importance of the right to participate and to protection, that both of these rights need to be kind of engaged for children. They have a right to both. Secondly, relationships. Research is essentially a relational endeavour. It happens between people. In research with children and young people, that can be between children as participants, adults as researchers. It can be with children and adults as co-researchers, involve the adults who play a role in children's lives, wider communities. But essentially, it's between people. And what we have, I think, with ethics is that the ethical principles, and I'm thinking about things like respect, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, ensuring that research does good, that it doesn't do harm. Those principles are kind of enacted and expressed in ethical practices, such as obtaining informed consent, addressing issues around privacy and confidentiality, looking at payment or compensation for participation in research, minimising harm as best as possible. These all happen, these practices, these ethical practices, which are underpinned by ethical principles, happen in the context of relationships. They don't happen in a vacuum, which kind of segues into the third thing, which is reflexivity. And I cannot overstate the importance of reflexivity in an ethical approach to research. Reflexivity means looking at what we as researchers bring to the research, bring to the context, bring to the situation, bring to the project. It involves looking at or being aware of our actions, being aware of the understandings we have, the knowledge we have, being aware of the values and attitudes, beliefs, assumptions that we bring with us to that situation, and how these all impact on what's happening, how they impact on the participants, how they impact on the project, how they impact on the knowledge that's being developed, and how they interact with what other people bring to that research context as well. And I think that, as Marlies and Debbie point out, there are some common ontological and epistemological concerns across childhood studies very clearly. And those things such as making children's views visible across all areas that affect them, recognising children as social actors, and promoting children's human rights. And I think that this common ground contributes to shaping ethical practices, the way in which we approach the research, bearing in mind children's rights, the relationships, and being reflexive about the way in which we approach it. But this common ground contributes to helping ensure that research involving children keeps them at the centre and upholds their rights, dignity and well-being, and really underpins an ethical approach to research.